Hello there. So, I'd like to make another vlog, and I wanted to talk about really some of the, let's say, should I say personal parts of the development? I just mean the human side, like personal motivations, personal reasons. I mean, that's always a part of this kind of thing, like why are you doing what you're doing? What is the plan? Because we're not robots, right? We're humans, and so that sort of human side is always part of the equation. And I was thinking of making a video about why I'm 36 years old, so why am I even doing any of this stuff? I mean, and I have to be maybe a little bit delicate. Let me make the point this way. So people who are about my age, a lot of us have played Super Mario 64, which was quite a nice game. And so if I were hanging out with one of my friends from back home and I said, hey, you want to play some Mario 64? They might say yeah, and that would be not a surprising thing for us to do, just hang out, play some Mario 64, or maybe Mario Kart 64, those kinds of games. Even maybe some old Super Nintendo games. That kind of thing. Even though we're in our mid-30s, because we grew up playing those games. And we also might play something more modern, like Apex Legends, or Factorio, or Stardew Valley, these kinds of games. But what I would not do is actually, somebody in their mid-40s, I would not ask them. It's extremely unlikely that they are going to want to play Super Mario 64, Stardew Valley, any of the games I mentioned. And actually, games kind of went through they had a bubble that burst. I don't know, a lot of the viewers here, I was naked for a while. A lot of the players here might not know about that whole, like, the history of video games, that there was this bubble that burst. I'm talking about, like, in the early 80s, I think. There was a period of something like 5 to 10 years, I think, where video games were kind of dead-ish, not completely dead, but there was this boom and then this bubble that burst, and things were not looking good for a while. And Nintendo came in and partly saved that. So I think it was I think it was Atari. See, this was before I was born, so I'm not super educated on this stuff, but I think there was an Atari system. Yeah, and the thing was that anyone could make Atari games and release them. So the market became inundated with just low-quality garbage. One of the most famous examples is this E.T. game. I mean, that was licensed, E.T., like the movie, is sort of famous as being the worst game of all time that was on the Atari. So it's kind of fun to look up about that. But so the market was inundated with all these titles, because you couldn't, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have the internet, you couldn't play a game. Normally, you couldn't play a game before buying it. I don't know, see, again, that was before I was born, so I don't know if they had places where you could rent games or anything like that. But in any case, the market was inundated with cheap garbage. A bit reminiscent of all the Roblox games out there, right? Like, it costs nothing to make a Roblox game, basically. So, but anyway, it was inundated with cheap garbage, and people realized that it was very risky to buy an Atari game because most of them were complete garbage. So the market for video games basically collapsed. I think there was still like an arcade market going on, but let's jump down here and see what's going on. This is actually a Blender model. Not the material's from Roblox Studio. But anyway, you can see the collision detection doesn't work, which is not surprising to me. But because this is concave. Well, actually, yeah, it's concave rather than convex, and concave models are not good for collision detection. You want convex models for collision detection, at least, and even some of that. I think Roblox Studio is not good at handling, so it's a little tricky, even if your models are all convex. Oh, here it works. That's interesting. Why? But anyway, so what was I going on about? Yeah, there's this bubble that burst. And then, so Nintendo came along, and one of the things they did is that they more or less made it for a long while that you kind of had to get their permission to make games for their system. Later on, some years later, so I might be botching the history. I'm not a history expert on this stuff, so take everything I say with a big grain of salt. But I think, so some years later, in America at least, you could have, like, third parties could make Nintendo games without Nintendo's permission. And that's typical for, I don't know, this is a tricky issue. Like, for example, the App Store, Apple's App Store is sort of a walled garden. You have to get apps approved by Google. But you could argue that this is sort of anti-competitive. What's the word? Anti-competition. And it kind of goes against the free market and sort of the basics of how the American economy works. And, I should be able to, you could argue, well, I should be able to make an app for iPhone whether Apple approves it or not. And I think that's fair, but you should be able to sell it on some third-party website or something. But Apple could have their own app store where they can curate and decide who gets to have an app and who doesn't. And but you should still be able to make an app and like sell it on your website or something like that. That's my opinion. This is getting a little bit far afield on other topics, but you could see how, like, if Apple just doesn't like you because of something you said on Twitter or for any reason whatsoever, they can just crush your company. Like if you had an app company making iPhone apps, they can basically crush it. And then, well, okay, there's this big competitor, Android, you could go over there and make an Android app. But then the same thing might happen, like Google and Apple actually have coordinated together on censoring people. I won't even name the person, but all the big tech companies coordinated together to censor one individual, very, very famous, initials AJ. And regardless of what you think of that individual, I sat up out of my chair when that happened because it was incredible that this was coordinated by all the major tech companies. I think even Amazon, I forget if Amazon was involved or not, but it wouldn't surprise me if they were. They might have even gotten banks involved. And so, this idea that if the big tech companies don't like your political views, that they might coordinate to sort of cancel you is a bit, Big Brother-esque and a bit scary. And those are private companies, so frankly they can do whatever they want. However, if you have this sort of monopoly, so if the government is stepping in to, say, force people to not be able to make iPhone apps, even that they're selling on their own website outside of the App Store, if the government is involved in protecting Apple's wishes and saying, oh no, you can't have your own third-party App Store, which I believe is the case, then you can say, well, the government is involved in sort of protecting this monopoly. It's a semi-monopoly, like Android with the Google Play Store, is that what it's called? And iPhone with its App Store. Together they basically form a monopoly. So monopoly has the word mono, it means one. So it's not exactly a monopoly, it's sort of an Apple-y. But yeah, and so there's an argument to be made that well, it should be allowed that there's a third-party app store. I don't know if there is. I think that there is not, though, right? And Apple really has it tightly controlled. And yeah, this is getting far off topic, but personally, I think that people should be able to make their own third-party apps, app stores, and distribute third-party apps where you could download an app for your iPhone where, okay, this wasn't Apple approved, but yeah, I think that people should have that free right. It's basically freedom of expression. I mean, definitely nobody's stopping me from writing an app, right? Now you do have to go in your settings. If you want to run it on your own phone, you have to do some things. You might need to be subscribed to the Apple's developer program, so you have to pay like $100 a year. And you might have to set all that up just to run it on your own phone, okay? Which is a little questionable if that's all we're talking about, running it on your own phone. But it's Apple's device, so okay, whatever. They have that. They can impose that, I guess. But or maybe if I thought about that more, I'd disagree with it. But and then like if I distribute that for free, say I think I'm already getting in trouble. But why? If I just wrote some code, an app, an iPhone app is just a bunch of code. Why should me distributing that for free get me in trouble? I don't know. So I'd have to check. I'm not sure that it would, but I really tend to think that there's no. I've never heard of any third-party app stores for iPhones, unless like maybe if it's for phones that are jailbroken, there's definitely distribution of different software for that. But that's all illegal again, so I'm pretty sure it's illegal. But anyway, whatever you think of the free market and capitalism and all that stuff, you have to admit that the situation right now with Apple and Google is very close to monopoly, very kind of monopolistic, and if that happened organically, like it kind of happened with Facebook, that's one thing. But if you have the government then stepping in to protect Apple, right, with these third-party, like banning third-party app stores, that's another can of worms, right? So it's two very different things to me. If the private market sort of organically evolves into a monopoly is one thing, and we can talk about, a conversation of if the government should step in and do something about that. However, yeah, so that's one thing, and it's very different if you have the government stepping in and helping to maintain the monopoly or near monopoly. Okay, so that's like, I just want to specify this is black and white, totally different conversations. I mean, they're loosely connected, but they're totally different conversations. And so in Nintendo's case, it was, I'm quite sure it was ruled kind of the opposite of how the Apple App Store is, because I remember all these unapproved third-party games for Nintendo were coming out. I don't know if they were coming out in Japan, but they were coming out in America. I think they had different looking cartridges. I think their cartridges maybe had to look different. Maybe not, maybe so, but they definitely existed. And I suspect that they didn't exist so much in the beginning. There was I think a legal battle associated with that. But anyway, but even whether that even though there were third-party games out, there was this like Nintendo seal, and Nintendo was sometimes trying to inform people about that in their advertising and on in Nintendo Power and that kind of stuff. Where it's like, look for the seal. Like if it doesn't have a seal, it's not Nintendo approved. So but Nintendo helped fix the game industry basically. At least I don't know about arcades and all that, but the home gaming console industry, right? We had there before Nintendo. a handful of years before, there was the Atari, and before that, I think, was the Commodore 64, and there was probably something before that. Yeah, there's at least a few, maybe at least a handful of these old systems before I was born. Yeah, and so that market collapsed, and then Nintendo came and brought it back, kind of brought the market back and recreated and rebuilt this enormous market. And with games like Dragon Quest, which was only popular in Japan, not in America, Dragon Quest was an enormously popular game in Japan. People were lined up around the corner outside of department stores to get the game. This was in the 80s, and so it sort of revived the market. Now, all I really wanted to say here with all this is I was just talking about the history of gaming a bit, and I was saying that a 45-year-old is not going to be interested in playing Super Mario 64. I've never seen someone of that age who is interested in any Nintendo 64 games or Super Nintendo games. To my knowledge, I mean, people who are 45 right now, there might be some. But when you get into people who are in their 50s right now, it's nearly out of the question. There's the people who are interested in games at that age in their 50s and 60s now. It's sort of niche. A lot of them maybe are programmers or game developers or Japanophiles or potentially people who grew up playing on the Atari or the Commodore 64, Pong, those very early ones, and people who were interested in doing programming on the Apple II. So it's a bit niche. My father is in his 70s actually, and when he was in college, he did some programming. He took a class doing programming, but they were punching cards. Okay, they were actually in the old days. You used to punch little cards, make little holes in cards in order to put data into a computer. And the programming languages, there wasn't C or C++ even, or I shouldn't say even about C++. There wasn't even C, okay? It was assembly, but not assembly that you would type in at a terminal. It was, punching it into cards. And so not only was it the laborious thing of punching cards, and then if you had one, you'd have to reserve time on the system, and you'd go in and you'd feed your cards into this computer, and if there's one mistake, you'd have to redo the whole thing, and you wouldn't have time, so you'd have to basically, it was common that you'd made one mistake, that happens, right? We make one mistake in our program, and then you basically have to re-reserve time, go back, fix your mistakes, come back maybe another day, right? Every time, imagine that workflow. Every time you make a little typo, basically, that's your workflow. Not only that, but it was assembly language, actually, or even machine code, basically. So that was tough. So it's not surprising to me that my father was not too interested in computer programming. He had that experience, and when I told him I was interested in computer programming, he said to me, "Why? Why would you want to do that?" But some of the people in their 50s and 60s, okay, so my dad's in his 70s, so going a bit younger, 50s and 60s, some of them may have had, when they were young or in college and all that, let's say in their teens or in college, they may have had the experience of programming on a Commodore 64 or an Apple II. And so the Commodore 64, so there used to be these magazines, and people would like in the magazine would be a game, for example, but it wasn't on a floppy disk or anything like that. You had to go home with your magazine and type out the program, the code for the game. You had to type it all out with no mistakes, and it was in assembly language for the Commodore 64, for example. I can reset my data somewhere. Where was that? So, yeah, you type that all out, and then you'd be able to play the game. So you can imagine if you were 8 years old or 14 years old or whatever, and that is something that you do in order to play a new game, that you buy a magazine, you take it home with you, you type out all of the code, however, probably, I'm guessing a few hundred lines of code, at least, and then you hit run, and if you didn't make any mistakes, then you had your game. Probably you had a couple of typos, so you had to go through and fix those. But if you were doing that, it'd be very easy to start taking an interest in how these games were made and looking like, can I give myself infinite health or extra lives or something just by changing some of this code? And all of that was assembly language. So I sometimes feel a little jealous of people who grew up doing that kind of thing. Or was that? I think this was after Steve Jobs kind of age, but his kind of generation. But Steve Jobs and his generation in the Silicon Valley area, a lot of those kids were children of engineers, and they were playing around with electrical engineering kits, which is a whole other thing. So sometimes I'm jealous of the people who grew up playing around with electrical engineering kits or electronics kits, where you build a condenser, build a capacitor, or build what are some of the other things a frequency counter. I think is a kind of harder project, but you play around with that. But yeah, sometimes I'm jealous of the a little tinge of jealousy for the people who grew up naturally just organically becoming interested in programming on the Commodore 64, doing assembly, like growing up learning how to code assembly. This is a very nerdy thing to say, but I think that's kind of cool. And maybe I can reset my data over here. By the way, this is, I'll just show you the game. Angela's Cave, if you're interested. But, yeah, so people growing up with assembly. So I've done some assembly, and I think if you're serious about becoming like an elite programmer, a great programmer, at some point you should study some assembly, but you only really need to do it a bit to satisfy your curiosity for how things work at a really low level. Low as in like close to the machine. I would recommend that at some point if you're interested in programming in the long term. Yeah, here we go. Reset data. So, oh, okay, I come back. Okay, interesting. Yeah, so, Commodore 64, assembly, yeah, but if you had grown up, coding with assembly for years, it'd be a different experience, right? So I'm a little jealous of that. Also with the Apple II, kind of similar, like not typing things out from magazines, I don't think, but the games back then were very, very simple for the Apple II. So some people would think, okay, if I want to make a game, like John Romero, if you know him, John Carmack and John Romero were the people who created Doom, along with one or two others. But they were programmers, and so he says that, yeah, he played around with Apple II games, and they looked, simple, and so he's like, well, I just need to learn, like one of the games was just text-based, so he's like, I just need to learn how to make some text on the screen. Actually, his favorite game was text-based, so he's like, I just need to learn that, and then I can make all kinds of games, text-based games. And which reminds me of like choose your own adventure stuff. Have you ever read one of those choose your own adventure books? Anyway. So yeah, I sometimes feel a little jealous of that. But there's this, maybe this gap though, because of how the game industry sort of collapsed at one point. Now during that time, that might have been when the Apple II was coming into being, so I think there's always maybe stuff to look at and work on. But anyway, I have never in real life met any of these great people who were inspired by the Commodore 64 or the Atari or the Apple II. But I've just, like, it's a common story. Even Steve Jobs, to an extent, he did sort of he did work for Atari at some point, I think, and program a game for Atari, or at least he got Steve Wozniak to program the game for him. But so he knew some basic programming, and yeah, so it inspired a lot of people, those people in those older generations. But all this is sort of to say, well, I'm talking about older generations and what kind of games they would relate to. But what I'm trying to sort of politely, tactfully say is that most Roblox games are not very interesting to me. Actually, this game, I really like the aesthetic. I kind of get... I don't know if there was some inspiration from Minecraft or not, but I feel that kind of inspiration. I've played some Minecraft, I don't know, a few hundred hours, and occasionally there are environments that are fun or like enjoyable to explore, and I kind of get those vibes a little bit in this cave. Yeah, I like the lighting also is nice to me. It's not using the sort of that Roblox has that night and day stuff that you can use in the engine, and they've kind of blocked everything off so that that's not being used, and they're doing all the lighting themselves basically, which creates this nice sort of cave ambience with the music. There's also at some point like the sound of dripping water. I wonder if they changed, the maker of this game changed it recently, because, yeah, I don't know. But anyway, yeah, so some games like this I find slightly inspiring. I like the environment here. And, like, for example, take the Tycoon games. The Tycoon games, I really relate to the enjoyment of building, of progressing through a game. And I understand that very well. I've experienced that with many, many, many games since I was a kid. But I played a bunch of Tycoon games, and I just barely felt a slight enjoyment once or twice. So I kind of get it. So I'm just saying, like, the vast majority of Roblox games are not interesting to me. I have to confess. That's not good for me to say. But, you know, I'm 36 years old. These are not... Roblox games are not the kind of thing that I would normally play. But I'm interested from a game development standpoint, from a programming standpoint, etc., etc., and I think there might be there's kind of this new generation of gamers who are being influenced by Roblox, and if I want to understand gamers in the future and now, it's kind of important to study Roblox, actually, in my opinion. I didn't really think about that a few months ago, but now that I've been studying Roblox, I do think that. So there's actually only really been a few times that I've enjoyed someone else's Roblox game. I have to confess, I've done a lot of toying with different games. Now, my own games, actually, I usually enjoy, which I think most people don't, because they're not very well developed games. There's no purpose either of them. There's no objective. However, basically, if you take one of the templates from Roblox and you simply add a rocket launcher, and then you make an advertisement and bring people into the game, and people can run around killing each other with rocket launchers, to me, that's fun. Just having weapons and being able to attack each other, to me, that's actually the most fun I've had in Roblox. That's why I keep doing those kinds of games. But there's this huge... If you actually do an ad for a game, well, if you're like me and you're on a PC and you do that, the first thing that's obvious is that most of the people coming in are apparently on mobile or tablet, and their experience is probably very different from a computer user's experience. And that's sort of like the biggest first lesson to me. And it's a very hard lesson because I've played around on mobile with my phone playing Roblox, including other people's games and my own games, and not once on my phone have I had any enjoyment whatsoever. And so I have to keep studying and try to find something. There are some games I've enjoyed on the phone. One of them was a SimCity game. I think it's called SimCity Build It or something. And poker games I've enjoyed. If I thought about it, there's probably a couple more. But as an old school gamer who's done a lot of PC gaming and all that, it's really hard for me to enjoy games on the phone in general. So I wish that I could enjoy them. I wish I could understand the enjoyment that a lot of those younger players are having. We're talking about a lot of kids, they don't have... I imagine if they had a computer, they would use that, but they don't have a computer. I'm guessing. I don't know. Maybe they're just waiting to get picked up from school, and they're just, they don't have a computer around them or something. I don't know. But, yeah. Anyway, there's a lot for me to learn, and this is... I don't think I've even been doing this for 2 months yet, and so I'm still just focused on learning. And, a lot of my games so far don't have any objective, right? That's the obvious thing that I need to add, and like that's really obvious for me. Like I will get around to that. So I'm more interested in learning how players act when there's no objective, because in the future all my games are going to have a clear objective and kind of like probably they're going to explain to the player like there might be a tutorial, or there's going to be something giving them a goal, right? And I just kind of believe in doing things not so well in the beginning, actually. It's like I'll compare things to like if you were trying to be a chef, and some people just try to reach for the stars and make these incredible dishes, but they haven't spent time to learn the fundamentals. Like, if you want to be a good chef, you probably have to cut thousands of onions and really build your knife skills first, right? So my approach is an indirect approach, like spiraling in from the outside. I'm not directly trying to make good games just yet. My focus is on improving my skills. So a lot of that might go in the direction of, trying to make a good game. But it's two different things to focus on. Trying to make a good game as soon as possible is one thing, but that's not my focus. My focus is on just learning. And actually deliberately not having a purpose right now makes the games very uninteresting. But I'm interested in how people respond to that. So those are the kinds of things I'm thinking about. So a lot of there's so many people who come and say tell me what I need to do. It's like there's there's 1,000 things I can do to improve the games. Most of them really obvious. So, I appreciate trying to help and, continue to give me advice. That's fine. But just understand that, like, I'm kind of ignoring it. Like, I don't totally ignore it. There have been some useful pointers. But, like, I'm actually not trying to make a good game yet. Sorry. So, yeah, I know some people might have trouble understanding that. But I really just have to keep pointing out that my purpose is to learn. And like recently was playing around with Blender. Some people have been helping me with stuff as well. So, this is actually my first game. I'll have to. This is like a primitive obby before I even knew what an obby was. But yeah. Anyway, so I'll bring that up in another devlog. And some people were helping with this one, which is quite beautiful. Actually, the same creator of this game made most of this, and it's quite nice. And so I'll put some. I'll check with them if they want to be mentioned, and I'll credit them in the description if they get back to me. Yeah, I didn't build any of this. And this is stuff I'm working on, but this is mainly just kit bashing. And you've got some Blender stuff, which this is sort of automated, like kind of like this area up here is kind of the same kind of thing, like an automated way of making like panels and what are called greebles. These little blocks are called greebles, I guess. So, diving into Blender and playing around as another way of learning. It's sort of more advanced learning. Like I should probably have more experience just building things out of parts. Like you can kind of tell, like these are just parts that I added in, and then this is like kit stuff. So if you're trying to make something like this door, I imagine you would do that in something like Blender. I can't imagine doing that from parts in Roblox Studio, but maybe there's some really skilled people who know how to do that. But yeah, I'm just focused on learning. This is a new project I'm working on. I was originally just working on kind of like a, what is it, like a lobby, like where people enter your games and then they can maybe receive some explanation and choose which direction to go, because I think it's such a huge difference between computer users and mobile users. So I kind of want to branch them off into different areas or something. But then I've been working on this and I'm thinking of building this into a game. So I don't know. Yep. But let me know what you think. Let me know if you have any ideas. And I'll put some credits in the description. If you ever help me, by the way, and you're, you might let me know right away if you're happy with me making videos and, mentioning you, crediting you, and all that stuff. But this is all built by someone else, who I will check if they're happy being credited. Some people, I imagine almost everyone is happy with that, but there might be some people who would rather stay sort of anonymous if they can. So I just want to be respectful and check with people. But yeah, someone was making this for me, and I'm quite grateful of that. So, yep, I guess that's about it, and have a good one. Take care.